Thank you. This is session, what, number 6?
Yep.
As usual, I posted a kickoff question. I don't have the exact question in front of me, but it's easy enough to prepare. Part two of the Fountainhead, where we see the famous scene between Rourke and Dominique. As you all know, I'm sure that's been a controversial scene for some time. Most notably, the left feminist Susan Brownmiller, I think in her book, Against Their Will or something, said that Rand was essentially glorifying rape. And she referred to Rand's philosophy of rape. Now, I doubt if anyone here is going to defend that position, but it's an interesting thing to discuss because it gets into Rand's philosophy of sex. So with that, I'm going to leave it open, solicit comments about this charge of Brownmiller. Was it an honest assessment on her part, do you think, or was it just the usual smear of Rand that we find so often? Any thoughts?
Well, I believe
I want to find out what David thinks.
I believe Rand called it rape by engraved invitation, correct?
That's how she responded in a radio interview. She said if it was rape by engraved invitation. It's interesting because Dominique, I was just rereading that section. Dominique at one refers to it herself as rape. She said, "What would my friends think if they knew I've been raped by this redheaded beast from a rock quarry?" And it strikes me as kind of a fantasy of hers. Well, I'm not sure fantasy is the right word. Anyway, I want to know what other people think.
Well, one thing I thought about it is, and why I mentioned David Kelly, when the criticism of it as rape is that really what the intent was and the meaning of it in the book? What was the intention and meaning of the book? What do they say that in Gold Stuff George, in the spirit of the law?
Well, today, I mean,
don't they have expression though legally that in the spirit of the way the law was created? But I thought all it seemed like to me was that they were lovers.
No.
So that in the book, I got the intensity of the passion, and that's it. But an actual rape would be something totally different.
Yeah, clearly Rand did not intend it to be real rape, but legally, if Dominique wanted to complain later, she bites this guy in the hand and it bleeds, there were the indications of not giving consent. I mean, it would get, I suppose, legally into discussion of what constitutes consent. But Rand also has work blowing up these buildings, so
yeah. So he's a terrible rapist.
Clearly she's not too interested in the legal niceties.
And she also loved to take situations that look like a clear crime, or that theft or fraud, like in Night of January 16th, and turn the perpetrators into interesting heroes. She loved that what-if premise.
Right.
So George is obviously right. This would be, a prosecutable, probably convictable offense if Dominique had reported it, but that's not the point.
Didn't she write this story about some journalist kidnapping the heiress, so that because there was no news in the town, nothing was going on, so the journalist kidnapped her, and then they had fun and they had a blast, and it was an adventure, and he got to write all these great stories about the inside information.
I forgot that. Yeah.
But
I wanted to add.
Go ahead, Patrick.
I wanted to add, I think Dominique has a philosophy where he believes in destroying beautiful things so that other people can't enjoy them. Like she smashes the Arctic statue, which she imports from another country. She constantly, at the start, undermines Rourke. It's like she's constantly testing him and herself. And so I interpreted the scene as those two things, testing herself and also Rourke's strength or, willpower. Like, he knew that she wanted him, but she was also going to try and stop him. So I think it's more, her character has a very strange value system, both holding up things that she has in high esteem, but also wanting to kind of desecrate them or destroy them sometimes, maybe including herself. So anyway, that's kind of a touchy topic. So so it's hard to talk about it perhaps in terms that aren't offensive, but that was how I interpreted the scene. And a part of me was just a bit like, oh, was this just Rand's like 50 Shades of Grey moment? Like, was she just writing fantasy like into the book? Maybe. I mean, they're clearly two like love interests, and yeah. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
There's some clear indications, thoughts, and/or comments by Dominique that she thought it was self-degradation on her part, and she liked that. And at one point, there's an indication, the fact that at that point she didn't even like Rourke, that it was done by a man she disliked. So we're kind of getting into rough sex fantasy stuff here, I think. And I don't know if anyone is comfortable talking about it, but, I think that's what's involved here. I mean, it's really, you consider when this was published, 1943, it's really remarkable. I was online at some board discussion, and some guy who just had it in for Rand, he said, I read the Fountainhead, it's nothing but softcore porn. Which I thought, even for a critic, is a bit of an overreach, right? But I'm sure.
Today, especially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the women have been silent about this. We've got the men pontificating about it.
I would say,
rape or not. So what are some of the women?
I've talked to a lot of women who've read this book, and that scene, it's a pretty popular fantasy among women. Not the idea of like just some random person raping you, but of a strong man kind of just taking what he wants. And you want it at the same time that you are saying no. But like deep down, you really do want this. I don't know. I asked a lot of women.
I'm glad you said that. Some of these guys are good.
I say it's a fantasy that a lot of women have. At least in my friend
So
group.
that, like the alpha male just taking over.
Yeah, that's what a man is. Like a man knows what
And
he
of course,
wants, takes what he wants.
friends.
I think that's kind of the point. So Marilyn is still with a professorial look on her face. Did you want to say anything about Marilyn?
Adele?
It is that it's Ayn Rand writing from a romantic realist perspective rather than a naturalist perspective. It's an idealized version of things.
And what do you think of that ideal?
I think it's pretty hot.
Yeah.
That's good, though. A deal.
Television version, the TV movie.
We have two for the women. Marilyn?
Well, I would say that it's definitely fiction. Yeah, I'm not gonna divulge any of my preferences any otherwise. So, but yeah, it reads it's very consistent with her character and with Rourke's character, and it's well written, and but look at Michael's face.
Well, have all you guys seen? I guess Marilyn hasn't seen it. The Showtime movie made based on Barbara Brandon's book, The Passion of Ayn Rand. There's this, what's her name? The famous actress played Rand just to a T. She was great. She won an Emmy for it.
On the blonde British one.
Yeah. And anyway, there's a scene early on when Frank O'Connor, when they're living in California, kind of makes a little bit of a, I don't remember the exact details, but sort of makes a romantic move towards Rand and says something about, are you interested in? And she says, Frank, must you always ask in that thick Russian accent? And the indication was Rand did like the man to take control. So, and I had various discussion with Roy Childs back in the early 70s when both of us were around Brandon. And Roy, when we were together with Brandon, Nathaniel would try to pry him for information. And Nathan, to his credit, wouldn't really talk about it. But
I think it's kind of an interesting jumping off point to look at the relationship in general between the two characters. And certainly there's a lot that happens up before that scene and then after it too. And I think the quarry scenes where Dominique doesn't really meet Rourke, but kind of discovers him and notices that he is out of place, and she sort of perhaps sorry to the other workers, and she's fascinated by him. And normally her effect on other men is that they sort of fall over themselves to, you know, introduce themselves to her, to fawn over her. Her descriptions in the book is that she and Rourke kind of doesn't care like about that. Certainly at the start, he's kind of more interested in what he's doing and stubborn and passive aggressive, and that is potentially you know, quite enthralling maybe for Dominique, because she's not used to having a, you know, a fight to get some man interested in her. So
she's intimidating men, and Rourke isn't intimidated by her.
Right. I mean, I quite enjoyed those scenes a lot. And she invites him to her house, right, her room, and points at the fireplace, and she's like, it's broken. You know, she's scratched it with like a knife or something. And, you know, he teases her because she probably expects in that first time that he'll make some sort of romantic move on her. And instead he gets out a chisel, you know, and he breaks the fireplace, and he's like, now it's broken. And he leaves, which is, you know, it's like kind of showing the middle finger or something. I like that scene.
Yeah.
And then he's.
Can I ask you one question about what you said? That Rourke has a kind of passive aggressive attitude. Can you explain that? I wouldn't have thought that. I think I'm getting I have a hunch about what you might mean, but I'd love to hear you explain that a little more.
Well, I guess there's different types of aggression, and maybe his is unintentional, but certainly ignoring someone, like when you know that someone's looking at you and they want you to acknowledge them, and you're aware of that, but you focus on something else, that's often quite a deliberate signal. It's a social signal. And
yeah,
to me, I've been on either side of that. And I recognize, oh, okay, he's deploying some passive aggression. So maybe just to see how she reacted, who knows? But
yeah, Patrick, I don't think I'd agree that I'd call that passive aggressive. The last thing I would think of Rourke as is passive aggressive, as I understand the term. Somebody who wants something, but they won't come out and say it. They just sort of play games. You know, I don't care. But Rourke, I think in a real sense, doesn't really care all that much at that point.
do you think he wasn't messing with her when he broke the fireplace?
Well, yeah, that was more
What she
taunting.
wanted?
That was more taunting. He was just letting her know, look, I know the game is playing. You're not fool. But
Okay.
people get the term differently. That's very possible.
he must care. I mean, she's the love of his life, right? Isn't that?
Well, later.
But so.
I mean, he takes off and leaves for a job. Doesn't even tell her he's leaving. I mean, that doesn't.
I love that part.
Yeah,
Okay, so
that's an interesting.
one interesting thing I think about him as a heroic character in novels is that my understanding of romantic literature was kind of the evil person was the interesting one, kind of like Disney cartoons. The evil ones have more color, they have more character, they have the better lines, they're ruthless, they have this high energy. And the prince or the hero is kind of passive or kind of dull. And I think in the 19th century, that's when they were like, the heroic characters were trying to be like Christ-like character and made them more two-dimensional and a kind of really kind of ruthless, aggressive, really focused main character who was also supposed to be the good guy.
I'm sorry, my screen, something just came up on my screen. I'm listening, but I may look like I'm distracted. Anyone want to? Okay, no, it's okay. Anyone want to reply to that?
That's a good point. That Rourke is extremely interesting, and in this dynamic between the two of them. I mean, if you really go in for that battle of the sexes, and Dominique as just being the quintessential female, and Rourke as the ideal man, and when these two get together, there's just got to be it's got to be big. It's got to be a major event. And I remember that Rand reading somewhere that she thought that quarry scene at the very beginning was the most romantic possible thing that she could think of, is seeing him all sweaty there and working, and her up above. And she just, she worked on that scene and really loved that. And she's right. It's very well done.
Well, in the actual movie, The Fountainhead, remember we talked about it, I think when we watched it, when Rourke is using that drill and they kind of slowly pan up the drill and, to his arms. And I think, okay, how much more phallic can we get here? I mean, really. But,
yeah, you're not really.
In support of what Marilyn said, I was struck again when I read before the Dominique and Rourke even get together, how central that whole scene about him liking the feeling of the drilling and her description. It was almost like a sexual thing. I wouldn't go that far, but it was certainly central. And it's remarkably written, even more than the sex scene, I think, which also is very well written. But that scene where the detail she goes into about, the granite quarry. Everyone else get that feeling had a very sensual quality to it?
Yes.
And the symbolism was all there.
Yeah.
Pounding the shit out of stones and
I'm sorry, what did you say? I didn't hear you.
pounding the shit out of rocks.
Oh.
I interpreted some of that scene a bit differently, because I think certainly at the start, Rourke is not aware of Dominique, and he's channeling his his energy into his job, and he's kind of enjoying the physicality of it, the routine of it. There's a lot of passages in the book that are about types of material, steel and rock, it being an environment to talk about those things more. And I think it's alluding to something deeper in the character of Rourke as well, which is that for him, it's about making something physically real that's an expression of who he is. And so working with the raw materials is pleasurable, even though it's very difficult physical work. And for most of the other men in the quarry, they'll be just turning up, doing it. They don't have this secret purpose to the work that they're doing.
Well, I have to say that my view of Dominique, I don't really like her character very much, I have to say. I try to think, well, I know it's an idealized portrait and all that, but if I met a woman like that in real life, you know, I would think, just stop playing games, all right? Now, let's just be more honest about it. So I'm not real sympathetic to her. I think, you know, she ends up, you know, marrying the wrong guy, and you know, just why do you want to throw your life away like that? Life's too short. Now I understand it's not, you know, it's not real life. I'll tell you a very brief but kind of tragic, funny story. I knew this guy when I was attending Brandon's groups in the early '70s. A very nice guy. I won't mention his name. And we hung out a lot together. He ended up being a psychologist in the long run. And there was this very cute Southern girl in the group that he wanted to ask out on a date, but he was very shy and he didn't know how to go about it. He told me this story personally. He finally gets his nerve out. They go to dinner or something. They end up in her place, and she's sort of stretched out on the couch. Now, he obviously wants to get involved with her, but doesn't know how to go about it. So without saying anything, he apparently leaps on top of her, looks her in the eye and says, "You want it, don't you?" He told me it was a work-like move. She, on the other hand,
no.
he says, "Get the fuck off of me." She pushes him off the couch and get the hell out of here. So it didn't work like he had hoped. But I said, that's an example of not trying to translate novels into reality, you know. But I felt bad for him. He meant well. He thought she liked Rand. He thought, well, she'll like this sort of approach. I said, you just don't jump on top of somebody like that. He said, I know. You know, I didn't know what to say. I was tongue-tied. So anyway.
That's
George,
what Rand does very well is it doesn't always show up in the movies as well. That she sets up the scene really well. So the dynamic, the quarry, the feeling of Rourke, the feeling of Dominique, the frustration, the heat, all those things are coming together, and all of a sudden there's a spark. And I think that's masterful as far as an artist setting it up.
Yeah, and she makes it very clear that both Rourke and Dominique understood what was happening even before it.
Like your friend was like, his mind was like somewhere else, and it was disconnected from.
Yeah, well, he was a nervous wreck. He was that type of guy. He just didn't know what to do. David, would you want to say
George,
something?
it's this kind of a paradox. I'm trying to share my webcam. Apparently, it's not. Oh, yeah, I can't.
There you go, David. You can share it now.
It's kind of a paradox, though, isn't it? Because, you know, the story you told is I could tell you other stories not quite as embarrassing about objectivists and the romantic escapades going back. Objectivists are not really notable for emotional intelligence.
What? I'm disappointed.
I mean, all of us who have been around for a while know that. But the striking thing is that this passage and the whole episode in the Fountainhead, and this is what I find the paradox. Rourke exhibits a fairly high degree of emotional intelligence in understanding what Dominique is thinking and feeling, what her motives are, what she wants. And this is a guy who afterwards says, I mean, he actually, there's a statement after, when he's thinking about this afterwards, when he says, it was strange to be conscious of another person's existence, to feel it as a close, urgent necessity. I mean, Rourke is the archetypical individualist, and Rand sets him up using romantic realist techniques to accentuate it by saying he's really not aware of other people.
Yeah.
So isn't this kind of a paradoxical? It's always struck me as interesting that okay, a guy who is not really aware of other people, suddenly, something's going on with this lady, and he gets her so deeply that, it just,
Yes,
he
I
knows
think
exactly what to do and why.
he does really care, and that I don't think Rourke was somebody who would do that. It had to be Dominique, and it's only ever going to be Dominique. Whereas Dominique has like a string of husbands, doesn't she? Before the two of them actually get together. But yes, but that's a very important point, and in the literature, in the fiction, is why it ultimately works, because you know that he actually took it very seriously, and he is going to wait for her and just be there for her, that she is the love of his life. So it's not as if he doesn't go down to the bar and tell the guys, or just put a notch on his belt. any of the things that a real cad, a jerk, worse words, would do, where he wants.
Would you call Dominique and Rourke self-aware?
Well, Dominique says a similar thing about that she's all of a sudden she's conscious of having somebody else actually affect what she does. That now she can no longer just do as she pleases. Now, every time she starts to think about something, she thinks about Rourke. And so that has had a significant change on her as well.
Did it occur to anyone else to ask, wonder whether Rourke was supposed to be a virgin at this point? Because he doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that would have had a lot of girlfriends in his earlier life. But if he hadn't had any sexual experience, it strikes me that that setup of him being so forceful would be far less likely. I mean, can we assume, is there any place that you guys recall that he'd had previous relationships? This is just
In an earlier version, there was the actress who lived in his building.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, Vera Dunn was a section that was cut out from Fountainhead.
Really? I didn't know that.
But yeah, that's a great question, George, because you wanted same question about John Galt.
Yeah. But again, I guess we shouldn't take some of these things too literally. Listen, there's another question I want to bring up, totally unrelated to the sex stuff. It's just bugging me. It's always bugged me, and I was reminded how much it bugs me. I'm wondering what the hell is the point of this. So, does anyone else want to say anything about the sex scene before I move on and ask this question?
I just want to make one literary point, and I love Marilyn's comment about that. When I was looking at this again tonight, in the scene where Rourke comes to her, comes to deal with the fireplace. This is, sorry, I've got to go back here too. When he actually breaks the stone, and he's giving this lecture on marble and the types of marble.
Yeah, that was
I mean, that first of all, there was a wonderful, portrayal of Rourke as the expert, technologist or technical guy as an architect, not just an artist. No offense, Michael, but he talks about the green marbles, and he says, true marble is a metaphoric form of limestone produced by heat and pressure. Pressure is a powerful factor. It leads to consequences which, once started, cannot be controlled.
Yeah.
And when you go back and read that, after having seen the sex scene, you think, oh God, Rand, that's foreshadowing. Am I making things up?
No,
I remember being struck by that where it goes into different types of marble, but I didn't draw that connection. But now that you mention it.
that's very good. Yeah, that's definitely foreshadowing.
Back to you.
Okay. Well, this is the scene where the attempted assassination or killing of Tui by what's the guy, sculptor?
Steve Maloney.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Huh?
Um,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Steve Maloney.
I just remember his name. I knew I met Stephen Mallory. Now, that's very odd to my mind. I'm not sure if it comes up again later in the book, but as presented in the chapters we're reading, what is the point of it? I mean, the only thing I can draw from it, because Mallory won't talk when he's arrested. He never met Tui. He didn't, blame Tui. No. The only thing I can get, I mean, is Rand trying to justify that in some way because Tui was a major contributor to the corrupt culture that made it impossible for Mallory to even earn a living? I mean, that's the only lesson I can get from that. But I mean, but that's a pretty remote association, trying to kill somebody because they think that the guy that they're trying to kill has had a bad influence. What is, someone else tell me, please, what the point of that is supposed to be, the attempted assassination?
I feel like Steve knew the evil in Tui, knew what Tui was, and was trying to stop it.
Okay, but that, I mean, killing somebody is a bit extreme, but
I'm just up to part of the book where Rourke's actually met and hired Mallory for a job and asked him about that. So I think.
Okay, I haven't got that.
I think at that scene, it's not. It's supposed to be a bit of a mystery and a bit of an unknown, and that we're not supposed to know too much about. Like at that point in the book, Tui doesn't seem like such a bad person, right? There's kind of these ominous things, perhaps about Tui that people feel, but they're unable to express what they are. And then there's a whole section of the book dedicated to him. In fact, sorry, is it part 2 that's dedicated to Tui or part 3?
Part 2.
I don't know. I frankly haven't gotten up to part 3. I'm rereading it.
Part 2 is Tui. Okay.
That's the one we're reading now.
You know what? One thing first learns of it. He's in the officers of Francon and higher. I guess it's Francon and Keating at that point. And some draftsman tells him, "Oh, did you hear? They thought maybe Tui had actually been killed." But shortly before that, he'd read this article, which was from Tui's column that was supposed to go in the next day's paper. And Keating, well, was he killed? And then he says, if he was killed, does that mean his article won't be published tomorrow? He wrote this glorious article about me, and the guy's dead. Does that mean they're not going to publish it? And I thought.
So I wonder, I think that's an excellent point. I wonder if that part of that assassination attempt is actually just to shed more light on Keating and on Tui's characters about the way that they respond to it. And Keating, who's, that's just so typical of him. I mean, it is exactly what he would say. But also Tui's way of responding, that very stoic and sort of unselfish so-called way that he responds. Oh, don't worry about me. I'll be fine. So adding just some more character development.
It's interesting what someone said. The reader's not supposed to know the degree to which he's a villain, but there are things he says that are not bad at times. I mean, there's comments that Tui makes. He mixes them in with other things, but there's sort of it does show a certain nobility of character if you don't know what a sleaze bucket he is by that point.
About artists, one of the interesting things that comes with the territory is that you're too young to know. You don't know the answers philosophically. You don't have wisdom yet. So you're 17 years old or you're 25 years old, and you embark on art projects. It's a very aggressive thing. You fly with your intuition. You just take actions on what are hunches, and you dive into it. And so I can see, like, I won't go into politics, but I have gut instincts about people politically by their body language. and I know they're evil. I just know it. And then later I find out all this stuff that was true about how I saw them as being evil. But I'm saying I practiced that for decades of diving into your intuition. And so Mallory can feel the evil, knows it's evil. He may not know all the answers, and he just dives into it saying, let's do this guy. The world will be a better place.
Yeah.
And it turns out to be true, but legally and realistically and socially, it's unacceptable.
But do you think Rand was in some sense attempting to justify the attempt by Mallory to kill? I mean, frankly, to a lot of readers, he probably just comes off as mentally unhinged for the time being, and that he was basically starving and he'd lost that chance to do sculpture.
Well, George and Michael, I think Michael's point is really well taken, and it's also the way I took it. But you articulated it better. Throughout the book, starting with Cameron, there's this sense that some people have that the world hates individuals, hates individualists, hates achievement, hates the work type. Cameron feels it. He doesn't know how to analyze it. He just knows that the banner represents the evil. And then Mallory is an artist who works on a much more intuitive, emotional frame, but he gets it too. And it takes us the whole book before we get the explanation of what that amounts to in the form of Rourke's trial speech, but even before that, Tui's exposition of how he wants to destroy individuality.
Right.
But that sense of the mass absorption and the mass effort to absorb the individual and destroy its individuality is, I think it's pervasive in the Fountainhead. So I just took it as a literary thing. Another example.
Could I just add something to your point there? You reminded me of it. I was thinking about you talked about Henry Cameron, and there's Mallory and Rourke. And I think that there's culturally the stereotype of a sort of tortured artist, or there's also the cultural understanding that sometimes if you follow your passion, that things don't work out, and people are given life advice to be practical and make other choices, and not necessarily to follow the things they're obsessed with. And each of these characters relates to the others. So, Peter Keating is an example of someone who had a different passion, and his mother encouraged him to do architecture, and so he, does it. But his heart's not really in it. He's in it for other reasons. I think Mallory is perhaps more of the stereotype in terms of he is a tortured artist. He's not he looks at Rourke later in the book, and he's like, "You don't understand because you're healthy. You've never been."
Yes, you're right.
No. I think he's a casualty too. I felt bad when this happened because he's not going to make art anymore, right? So he's sort of casualty of the way things are. Somebody who isn't going to prevail, who isn't going to.
Pushed wouldn't be endorsing his action. She's just using his illustration of someone who's pushed over the edge.
Right. So
He does like characters that some are just mixed and they don't make it.
yeah, and he doesn't make it. It's sad. I felt really sad.
Could I just ask the group something?
Eggert in Atlas Shrugged. She's such a good person, but she doesn't quite know enough. And she gets herself into hot water, and it's way too.
Which character in Atlas Shrugged did you mention?
Cheryl.
Okay. All right. Did Patrick, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of comment on, I can't think of many other authors where Rand takes quite a strong or forceful opinion on dividing the world up into different groups, right? Like good and evil, and according to her value system. She really seems to also divide things into the smart and the pure and the not so smart, right? And in some of her interviews and things as well, she's quite critical of capable of integrating their own life or big bodies of knowledge and things like that. I mean, she uses words like retarded and stuff in interviews, referring to people that aren't capable intellectually of understanding her ideas. And she's not talking about people with disabilities, but ordinary people, average. And I just have noticed recently, and in the book, because the characters are so sharply defined, they're like high resolution characters, that feels unusual for most authors. I really don't personally know.
Also, and I've mentioned this before, that I really like her minor characters, these characters that kind of come in and don't play a major role. I find those sometimes just fascinating to read. And that, to me, they represent gradations. In other words, you got maybe work on one extent, Huey on the other, but then you have all characters who kind of represent different points along the spectrum. Yeah,
one thing that I've noticed with really exceptional people, I've had the opportunity to like talk with Billie Jean King before, and and other people in powerful positions.
Your sister was a tennis pro, right?
Yeah, and she created women's professional tennis.
Only.
They see it so clearly and simply. They can't believe no one doesn't get their vision. This is so easy. And they're absolutely geniuses and brilliant for what they can accomplish and what they can do. But for them, it is like 2 + 2 is 4. How can you not get this?
Yeah.
And I've seen that pattern with many extremely smart people. And it's one mistake they make. One mistake is that they make their genius or their abilities seem so simple that everyone's an idiot who is not on that level.
Yeah.
And I've seen them make that mistake as well. So they just look dumbfounded that someone doesn't get it.
Okay, so to your point, Michael, and to ask then, do other people in the group find her writing style, not just this book, but other books too, do you sometimes feel that it is too harsh or unfair on the characters that are not the heroes, not the geniuses, or do you think she nailed it? She, got it right.
Well, my personal opinion is that heroes are heroes for a reason. They're exceptional. They're just not ordinary people. They're just not ordinary. They've done feats of genius in their fields. They've innovated, they've done something incredible, or they have a work ethic that is beyond belief, where they work 18 hours a day and intelligently. So I think she really laid out, from what I can see, is that heroes are exceptional people. And then consequently, everyone would like to feel like they're a hero, but it's not always that way.
All of you were in the 4 chapters we read for today, when Tui is asking Keating questions about work, and there's a string of questions and answers. Is he happy? No. And then basically all he cares about is architecture. I thought that was sort of an interesting portrait. Of course, how accurate Keating's descriptions are supposed to be, sort of left open to the reader, but he was just very driven, one of those driven people. So,
George, I noted that passage as well, and one of the notes I made in my notes on the Fountainhead is that it would be interesting, and I've never actually done this, is to match up the questions that Tui is asking Keating about Rourke in this chapter with his confession of his goals to Keating in part 4 toward the end. That, because I have never done this, one by one, but does Rourke laugh? There's a line in Tui's make everything humorous as a way of demeaning it. Does he like to be admired, believe in God, talk much, listen, always wanted to be an architect? I mean, I would bet if we actually did that exercise, if you ask, I will gladly volunteer to do it for when we get to part 4.
Please do it.
A clear correspondence. Anyway, but it is fascinating, yes, because Keating doesn't get it, does he? He doesn't know what Tui's what he's really getting at. That's my sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I thought for the most part, Keating's answers were, pretty much on point. Although the thing about laughing and stuff, I mean, the first line of the novel is, we're standing on the edge of a cliff laughing. So obviously,
right. Well, there is that.
So there was at least one exception. I found you mentioned that bringing up this meeting between Tui and Keating. A lot of interesting stuff in there. One thing I find interesting about Rand is she brings in all these unstated, implicit understandings between people. And clearly that's at work with Tui and Keating. At one point it's made clear when Tui knows that he didn't design the Cosmo-Slotnick building on his own. And Tui is praising him for it. Both of them know this is bullshit, basically. But both of them are happy with it. It's like, well, we understand one another, don't we? Tui, this is interesting. I've thought about this a lot. That I mentioned in a previous session, and on one of my L.org essays about Rand, I noted that, as far as I can tell, if you read the Journal of Divine Rand, and it contains notes she made about these characters, her development of Tui is much longer than any other character. And I think it's because of its complexity. And one thing I find interesting is whether Tui really believed all of the shit he was shoveling out. I mean, the thing about he seemed unconcerned about the assassination attempt. Did he really not care that much? Was he telling the truth, or was he thinking, I'd like to strangle the guy, but I've got to put on this facade? So how much of Tui up to this point is a facade, and how much of it is how he really thinks and feels?
Well, George, I would offer a hypothesis to be confirmed or disconfirmed that everything Tui says is actually true and honest if you take it in Rand's sense of what the words actually mean. But we don't know what they mean until we get a lot further along in the book.
But do they represent Tui's authentic feelings? Did he really have no resentment against the guy that tried to kill him? Or was that just he wanted to appear to be this sort of benevolent,
I would think that Tui's motivation was anti-good. So if someone did something bad, I don't think either you did something brilliant and great, that just rubbed him the wrong way. He couldn't stand that. And that's what he had to take down. But if someone's like doing a stupid thing and committing their own kind of death warrant,
Right.
like, well, okay, that guy's done. He's got to kill me, but he's not worth anything anymore.
In that meeting, Catherine is present. I found that fascinating, looking at that closely. How Tui's kind of passive-aggressive thing, and here I would use the term, comes out in regard to her. He says, well, I'm glad you guys are getting a horse. You'll cook for him, and you'll don its socks, and, like that would be pretty snotty. And I wish you the best. And
that's passive-aggressive.
I call that passive. And Catherine doesn't appear to be in the best of moods. The way her body posture and all that, she's leaning forward, and it kind of becomes a little more clear. Although previously she has nothing but praise for her uncle. Now it becomes a little more clear that life is not all that good in a lot of ways, because he makes those little snarky remarks. Then Keating follows up like, "Oh, you're gonna have to quit your job, of course." And Catherine is working to help disabled kids or something, and she likes the job. She says, "I love doing this," but Keating takes that. Of course, you'll have to quit your job. But I thought that was interesting how Tui very kind of snarky with, but in that kind of benevolent, seemingly benevolent way. But
Yeah, you're right. He takes her work away from her, which I mean, work, love, and work, aren't these the high values that we all uphold? And then the first thing he does is tell her, well, of course you can't do that. So they really is defacing her. They're just taking away anything of her that is left. I mean, apparently she had to work very hard to just cobble out the tiny little self that she is, right? But then they're very callow in terms of just running roughshod over her,
Right.
Which could be interesting in terms of Dominique and perhaps another form of manhandling women, maybe a more what Rand would consider perhaps even worse consequences.
yeah, it's one of the real. I'm sure you're all aware of this. One of the real injustices. Of course, a lot of the feminist stuff is on the left, but there's arisen more of a libertarian type of feminism, where she has gotten acknowledged. But all this, the fact that Rand has basically been forgotten by many major feminists, and yet very early on she was writing stuff like this, very pro independent women, professional women, all of that stuff. And yet because of her political and maybe because of her moral views, it's almost like, well, we really don't want to talk about her.
Yeah,
also,
ideology is thicker than hormones.
Apparently so.
I think that the character of Tui is also a outlet for Rand to express some of her views about things. Like, I think in Atlas Shrugged, as well as this book, it's a recurring theme for her to recast it as a dishonest and self-serving sort of activity. I mean, there's a different tradition even in the modern world, right, where you have several of the top billionaires in the world that they have a different mission with their philanthropy. It's like Bill Gates has a very interesting philosophy, which is he wants to go where the market is not being efficient, and he wants to try to change things that he cares about there. And to me, I find people like that interesting and read about them, because I think they are actually, in some ways, examples of ultra high achievers that have changed the world and done really interesting things. But I find the character of Tui is a criticism also of that wanting to do things that are charitable, not necessarily for the good of the act or the people that it impacts, but for the way it makes someone be seen to others. In the same way Keating is pursuing his career because he wants people to look at him.
Right.
Tui is doing these things not because he cares, he's doing it because he wants people to perceive him a certain way. But
the description of Catherine, where she says that she really enjoys, I don't remember the exact words, but she really enjoys, in effect, helping these children that can't help themselves. Now, when I read that, I remember thinking, is Rand kind of taking a jab here at, social workers and that kind of work? And I kind of have to think she is. Like a character like Catherine, she would take pleasure in that. If so, I don't quite understand it. I mean, there's no reason why being a nurse or a volunteer to help people can't be any more challenging of a career than any other type of career. But what's your opinion of that? The fact that she linked Catherine to this kind of, quote, altruistic type of work. Is that meant to be kind of a reflection on her character? You all recall the part I'm talking about? It comes up in the discussion with Tui, in the meeting with Tui.
Well, she doesn't, her inner life of her own passion is like undeveloped. She had hints of it when she first had the relationship with Peter, when they were first getting involved. She had, and then she invested in her uncle. And so she thought, well, oh, I don't understand everything, but he's a great man and I'm going to follow him and just think the world of him. Instead of going the other way and just being introspective and going step by step about her own passion and values. So it's almost like she didn't make good choices. She picked Peter and her uncle, and they let her down.
Well, obviously he likes her because she's basically an empty vessel that will accept anything he does. But David, was that your voice I just heard?
Yeah, I think Kat always struck me as kind of the inverse of Cheryl Taggart in the Fountainhead, in Atlas Shrugged, in the sense that she did have some streak of individuality that was reflected in her feeling for Peter and her desire genuinely to be helpful. And I agree that Rand used social workers as a category to, perhaps somewhat unfairly, but remember this is fiction, to represent an altruist principle. But she gets engulfed and destroyed by her uncle. I mean, a couple of weeks ago we talked about that scene where he's speaking, and Peter realizes that she's being absorbed, immersed, and wiped out as an individual person by hearing Tui's voice. And Tui, is she's like the first one he sets out to destroy. And he does, because as seen when we get to the end of the book, that she has become bitter and alienated. But I don't think you can interpret it as Rand's philosophical view that charitable work is necessarily wrong. It's a form of, as long as you regard it as a form of productivity and not as altruistic, and not as glorified by elevating, the least, or connecting it at the expense of achievement.
I remember in high school, this was before I read Randy, and I often thought about this. I was bowling with my brother. There were some girls next to us, and I struck up a conversation. Very pretty girl of my age and all that. I think I was a sophomore in high school, and so I ended up asking her out, and we had a pretty nice time. And while we're talking, I asked her, what her career plans were, and she said, "I want to be a social worker because I like helping people." Now, for some reason, I wasn't particularly judgmental. All interest in that girl just completely drained from my body. It was like, I didn't say anything, but it was like, what? Why would you want to be a social worker? So whatever it was that later appealed.
That's by Ayn Rand.
Huh?
Were you familiar with Ayn Rand?
No, I never heard of the woman by then. But I didn't understand this. I just lost all interest. It's like, give me a call, and then I never called her. And I thought that, and maybe that's part of the reason Ayn Rand had been. I mean, I wasn't against social workers. I had no real opinion. But as a career goal, that just struck me as so insipid. Like, why would you even tell me that? If it's true, you should just lie. I want to be a writer. I want to be a whatever. But it was very odd. Some people maybe have that ingrained in their personalities. But yeah, I think David's obviously right, though. that Rand used social work as kind of a what would you call it? Sort of a exemplar of people.
Yeah.
All right, folks.
What was that?
It's a
I'm
beautiful
sorry, that's my
story. Does anybody have any final things? Adele's over there falling asleep. It's like 1 or 2 o'clock in Germany right now.
Oh, poor Adele.
Does anybody have anything else to add before we wrap it up? No? Okay. Just want to
Nope.
remind you
I
that
appreciate everyone. It was another great.
remember we're not
Thanks, George.
next Tuesday,
Yeah, thank you.
the 4th of July, but we will be picking it up after that. So I'll see everybody in 2 weeks.
All right. Bye, everybody.
All
Thanks,
right.
George.
Hi.
Okay.